This is Tennessee Talks with United States Congressman Tim Burchett.
I'm Congressman Tim Burchett, and welcome back to another episode of Tennessee Talks. Today I'm completely thrilled that I have my buddy Dr. Wanamaker here with me. And Dr. Wanamaker is an associate professor of economics at the University of Tennessee, a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, and also serves as a research fellow at the Institute of Labor Economics. She served as chief domestic economist at the White House Council of Economic Advisors during the Trump administration, which is pretty cool. You can give me some on that. She also is a member of the Federal Workforce Policy Advisory Board that was chaired by Ivanka Trump and Wilbur Ross. And Dr. Wanamaker, it's good to have you here with us. Now, thank you for coming on our show with us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Cool. We got a few questions here, so if you can't answer them, you just say, I refuse to answer those this time. I'll check with my attorneys. No, we're good. What are some of the biggest differences you see in the way the current administration, the Biden administration, handles our economy compared to the last administration?
It's a good question. Well, first I'll say there's some things that didn't change. So I think it's sort of remarkable how much trade policy didn't change that much, tax policy didn't change that much. So there were things that folks campaigned on in this election that once they got in office didn't necessarily decide to make any adjustments on.
Yeah, you see that a lot in politics.
You see that a lot.
They get in there, they chew on it, and then they think, I'm going to let that one slide for a little while.
Yeah, I think the biggest policy difference is probably not legislative, it's probably regulatory. What's coming out of the agencies and offices in the agencies that wouldn't exist in a different administration, for example.
Right. I hear that a lot, actually, across the board. What should the U.S. strategy be to restore and strengthen our workforce? We get, when I'm out, my degree was technological and adult education from UT, and I get a lot of talk about workforce development and the lack thereof.
Yeah. So I actually think that there are several dynamics that are pushing us towards more industry involvement in worker training. And so, for example, young people don't move very much anymore.
Do they not?
Relative to what used to happen. So there's actually more security in training your own workers and assuming they're going to be here for a while, because they're not going to move across the country. It's just not something they do much anymore.
It's not adventurous, or? They're
not adventurous. I think cost of housing has something to do with it. It's hard to move to California. It's really expensive. And a lot of folks live with their parents for much longer than before for that same reason.
Yeah.
So I think you'll see businesses decide, I'm not going to wait on public institutions like the one I work for to train people. I'm just going to do it myself.
Right. Yeah,
cut out the middleman.
I heard a lot of kids when I was growing up, they couldn't wait to get out of here, and then once they got sort of established, they couldn't wait to get back.
Yeah, and now they don't. The boomerang doesn't even happen. They just stay.
They just stay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. I love my little girl. I hope she stays around town, but I don't know. She's defied the odds at this point, so I expect she might just continue to do that. How does the federal government red tape and overregulation affect our economy?
Well, when we teach, so I taught econ at UT for 14 years. They don't let me teach anymore, but I used to. And we used to teach our students that it's just like a tax. Regulation is just like a tax. It eliminates activity in the market that would otherwise have happened, but now doesn't happen because the tax is there or the regulation is there. So it reduces all the components of economic activity you care about. Reduces production, reduces employment, reduces output, reduces the number of services, reduces trade, it reduces everything. And so you have lower output, lower employment, lower incomes.
I was an econ major for about 15 minutes. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. What scared you off?
You had to make better than a D in your major, apparently. That was some kind of crazy rule they had.
Whose rule is that?
Yeah.
They still have it, Yeah.
Crazy rule. Anyway, which sectors do you think have been hit the hardest by the big government regulations?
Well, I hear a lot on campus from my colleagues in supply chain management and transportation about transportation regulation.
Yeah.
And it's there for a reason, but there's not a whole lot of flexibility to changing conditions on the ground. So when we had the major truck driver supply chain crises coming out of COVID, we didn't really adjust anything in terms of regulation to try to adapt to the situation we were in.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. Healthcare, of course,
Sure.
is a big one.
Yeah, supply chain. That seems like it's the buzzword of the good old boys.
It's the buzzword.
You know,
it's the buzzword.
I bought a sawmill from the farm because I cut my own fences, and I remember every one of them guys was like on the phone. They didn't know who I was, and they were like, "Man, you know that supply chain's all jacked up all over the country. I don't know if you know anything about that." And I was like, "I've heard a little bit about it. Yeah, I have." So.
But even today, if you go to a store, say like, get buy a pair of shoes in my size, and they'll say
supply chain. Yeah. I know. We got no eggs. Supply chain.
Supply chain, always.
Yeah. Gotta get some night crawlers. It's supply chain. What was your take on how the government was trying to handle the inflation crisis? What do you think they should have done differently?
Well, I think we learned a lesson, which is that you spend too much money, you'll get inflation.
Yeah.
I think people.
I wish we could still. I mean, it seems like they just beat that into our heads, but it just never seems to end.
Well, and the other thing is we had come through so many years of inflation that was too low. The Fed has a 2% target. We were under it. So it gave us this false sense of security that we can't even get inflation when we want it. So let's just keep spending, and then of course we overdid it.
Yeah, and then it caught up to us.
Yep.
Doc, let me ask you, what specifically do you do at the Baker Center?
Well, that's a good question.
Not just you. But
I answer emails. That's what I do.
Yeah, I guarantee you do that.
Yeah, a lot of those. Well, as of today, we do research, student programs, lots of engagement with the community.
Do you have any parking?
Well, I do have parking. It's the most important thing I have.
Yeah.
But in July, and when school starts back in August, we'll be a school of public policy, all approvals coming through in order. And so we'll have master's students this fall, we'll have undergrads next fall, and our mission is to ground those students in the legacy of Howard Baker and prepare them for careers in public service.
Very cool.
We're really excited about it. We have so many resources at our disposal to do that, and so many people who are rooting for us. So I have no doubt we'll be successful.
It's pretty cool that a guy came from where he did to get to where he was. I mean, and then he ended his career and then came back home and still was part of the community. It wasn't,
And established the center, honestly, with the hopes then that it would be a school of public policy, and it didn't happen. And so 20 years later, this chancellor who doesn't take no for an answer said, we're doing it.
That's good. I'm glad to hear it, because it was it's kind of a disappointment to me after knowing Senator Baker and just everything that his whole life, and then now I'm glad the university is embracing that.
Yeah, he's the perfect grounding for students, right? Who he was is who they need to be.
Yep.
So we're really proud of that.
It wasn't really, you'd see him, I can remember seeing him walking down Gay Street with some people, and it wasn't a big entourage or something, him and Ron McMahon or somebody, and that was his chief of staff, and his son was a lobbyist down in Nashville, and of course being from Knoxville, we all knew everybody, and it was always just cool seeing him around. And then I remembered when he came into town, he was here for something, he was hosting something at the city county building, and Miss Dole was here, Elizabeth Dole. I think she was running for president at the time, maybe even. And I remember they were sitting there talking, and I said, and she and I were talking, and then Senator Baker walked up, and I was just kind of cutting up, and I said, "Oh, Miss Dole, let me introduce you to Howard Baker. He's a friend of mine." "Oh, hey, Howard, I don't know if we met or not." And it was so funny. And we were just cutting up, and people were just standing around going, "What in the world?" I was a young political operative at the time, so it was. You
were a comedian even then.
Yeah,
so the greatest comedian of the House of Representatives, and that the award they gave you recently.
And then it was written by one of the political magazines, and then the next week the same people called me and said, last week we said you were the comedian, and this week we're saying you're the only adult in the room, because what went down with the speaker. I said, yeah, I'm pretty right. Well, I said, I don't want that to get out now.
You are Howard Baker, maybe.
No, not hardly. No, don't tell Jim Haslam that. Mr. Haslam.
And edit.
No, that's fine. No, Big Jim's my buddy. He knows that. We cut up all the time. He and Senator Baker. He tells me Senator Baker stories all the time. So they were big. They were big buddies. I think he was kind of his mentor in politics, which is kind of cool.
I think Mr. Haslam's funniest line is sometimes he'll look at me and he served as the chair of the board at the Baker Center for 20 years, and he'll look at me and he'll say, "Why am I still carrying Howard Baker's water, Dr. Wanamaker? Tell me that." Say, I don't know. Why are you?
Because he wants to serve the community. That's what it is. Yeah.
And because Howard Baker meant that much to him and so many other people, they're still willing to do whatever.
Sure, he knows what he meant to the community. So I think that's pretty cool. Well, the worst part about this show is I ask the folks if they get to ask me anything. Dr. Wanamaker, do you have anything that you need to ask me? It's all fair, I promise you. And if I don't like it, I just edit this part out anyway, so go ahead.
Okay, so how many questions do I get?
As many as you want.
Okay, I have 2.
You're the professor.
I have 2.
All right.
Maybe 3. All right, is it a balloon or a UFO? That's the first question.
Well, it's unidentified, so if I don't have my glasses on and a big bird, like we have a family of hawks and owls at the farm, and if they fly over and I don't have my glasses on, that's unidentified.
That's also...
Yes, ma'am. You have to be, as the good old boys say, you have to be a little more Pacific with that question. But it is, the first one was Chinese, the second, third, and possibly the fourth were civilian, possibly somebody's science experiment, and Trudeau saw the political impact that it was having on Biden, and he said, shoot that thing down. So he called he got a hold of NORAD, and they shot it down, and with a Sidewinder. And but there's a lot of misconceptions out there. I'll just leave it at that. But as far as a UFO, something that is possibly from another solar system, do you honestly think something could travel 1,000 light years and then we're going to shoot it down? No, ma'am.
We caught it.
No, it's not going to happen. So I think you could mark that one off.
Okay, I got another one.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, I work for the University of Tennessee.
I'm aware of that.
A place I love. Universities, higher education, under a lot of scrutiny right now. How should we do it differently?
I think you should, your state legislature, you need to cut out all the liberal woke stuff that seems to feel, and I realize that's such a small percentage, but I think they should start listening to some of the legislators and some of the taxpayers in the state, because they're mounting up. I would just say they are getting more and more, and I'm afraid every time, and it's public record. I don't think people realize that it's they're incredibly educated people, but it's public record which primaries they vote in. And when you send somebody down, or they're schmoozing them in the skybox during a football game, it's all they got to do is get their child to get on the computer to see which primary they vote in. And so you need to. I would suggest that they could. You can find people that vote conservative occasionally that could work for universities, and not just in certain areas. I think you could, as they do with the liberal brush. I think they paint it pretty broad, and that would be my biggest suggestion right off the bat. I could give you a list of them if you'd give me enough time, but that's sort of where I think I'd go.
So more ideological diversity, more political diversity.
As I say, every time somebody tells me they have diversity at the University of Tennessee, I say, how many Republicans do y'all have in the sociology department? And then I'll say, let's celebrate diversity there first. And then, I just use, not picking on the sociology department, but that's an easy target, obviously. And there's quite a few conservative folks that work at the university, but you've got quite a few that aren't. A lot of the hatred I receive on the internet is usually somebody from the university. So, you know, but I'm not, I mean, you shouldn't censor them by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm just saying you don't get a lot of conservative interaction from the good old University of Tennessee.
That you know about the Institute of American Civics, which the state funded at the Baker Center.
I'm well aware of that, and that you're checking that box, and I get that, but you're
well,
not.
I don't say we're not checking a box. I think we're doing what Howard Baker wanted us to do.
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Yes, ma'am. And I'm glad to see that, because for so long I helped get some early funding for the Baker Center. When I was with the legislature, I knew Senator Baker. You know, he called me when I was, I remember when I was elected mayor, and the next day my assistant said, a man named Howard Baker called, and I said, what? And she said, yeah, he called yesterday, and I called and talked to Miss Katzenbaum, you know, his wife, and, you know, Senator Katzenbaum, Nancy Katzenbaum, I believe is her name, and we talked and laughed, and I told them that story, and they thought that was great, and she said, wait a minute, I'll get Howard on the phone. And he got on the phone, and he and my dad were buddies. So I'm glad to see that it is now doing what it was originally intended to be.
I have two of my staff members who are in Huntsville, Tennessee today.
Oh, really?
It's freezing. And Don Stansberry is taking them on a tour of the homeland. And I'm going to send them all up there in the next few months, because they need to know where he was from and what mattered to him.
I think that's a good idea. I was at an event for Senator Thompson at his place, and I was a state senator at the time, and Senator Baker said, Tim, why don't you sit with me? I said, okay. And this lady walked up and said, and I remember Senator Baker, we were eating barbecue, and as you do at political events in East Tennessee, and this lady walked up and said, Senator Baker, I don't want to bother you. And he looked at me and goes, but, and she goes, but, and after she walked away and gave us this, you know, whatever it was, dogs barking at night, can you get somebody to take care of it? He said, that's the longest word in politics, Tim, is but. And I always remember that. And my other Howard Baker story, I was a patrol boy. The first time I went to Washington, D.C. was 1976. And I remembered he pulled right up in front of the Capitol in his Cutlass convertible and got out, and there was, you know, maybe one security guard, and I don't even know if there was even anything to block anybody. And he gets out of that convertible, and he asked me my name. I said, Tim Burchett, and he goes, is your dad Charlie? And I said, yes. And he said, well, tell Charlie I said hello. And I thought, I mean, that was really cool, but it was just classic Howard Baker, because he knew the people he represented, so that was cool. But anyway, I guess, did you have anything else?
No.
Anything else? I mean, I didn't want to, you know. All right.
I'm good.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today. Our episodes are, we've been getting a lot more viewing as of late, so I'm sure this one will be at the top, and I'll probably get a letter from UT wanting to know who you know,
who authorized this?
Yeah, who authorized this thing? And I said, I don't know. But anyway, I'm Tim Burchett, and I want to thank everybody for another episode of Tennessee Talks. It's been really cool. Thank you, Doc. Appreciate
Thanks
you
for
being here,
having me.
ma'am.
Appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Talks with United States Congressman Tim Burchett. Thanks for listening to this episode of Tennessee Talks. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Keep up with Congressman Burchett by following Rep. Tim Burchett on Twitter and Instagram, and Congressman Tim Burchett on Facebook and YouTube.